I spent over 20 years of my life as a paramedic, always racing towards chaos while everyone else ran away from it. For me, it was more than just a job. It felt like what I was born to do. Every shift was unpredictable, each call completely different from the last. And honestly, that's part of what kept me going. I've lost count of the times I found myself kneeling beside wrecked cars, holding someone's hand as they slipped away, or desperately performing CPR while silently begging God to spare another life. The adrenaline was constant, exhausting, and emotionally draining. But even after years, the hardest thing to accept was the randomness of it all. I never understood why some people walked away without a scratch, while others, equally innocent, never got another chance. On the night everything changed, I was working the night shift with my partner Mark. It was one of those quiet moments, sitting in the ambulance, drinking terrible coffee, just waiting for the radio to crackle with our next emergency. Eventually, it did. A multiple vehicle accident with possible critical injuries. Instinctively, we kicked into gear, sirens blaring, speeding through the city streets towards another life or death situation. We were just a few blocks away when, out of nowhere, a massive truck slammed into our ambulance from the side. The impact was instant and brutal, and suddenly, the whole world turned into chaos. Glass shattered everywhere. Metal screamed as it twisted, and I felt my body thrown violently forward, pinned painfully by the seatbelt before darkness swallowed me completely. When I woke up, I didn't immediately realize something was wrong. There was no pain, no sense of panic, just an eerie stillness that made me feel weirdly detached from what had just happened. I thought maybe I was in shock, or that my body was protecting me somehow. But as I looked around, I realized that I was no longer in the ambulance. Not physically anyway. I was hovering just above it, and everything felt surreal. Below me, I could see clearly into the wreckage. I saw myself slumped in the driver's seat, twisted awkwardly, my body crushed against the metal frame. Mark was unconscious next to me, bleeding badly from a gash on his head. I watched in confusion as firefighters and paramedics, people I knew personally, desperately worked to free us. Seeing my friend's panic sent chills through me, and that's when it finally hit me. I was looking down at my own lifeless body. The strangest part wasn't realizing I had died. It was the peace I felt when it became clear. Instead of being scared or desperate to return, I felt an overwhelming calmness, as though I'd been freed from a burden I hadn't even known I was carrying. Everything moved slowly around me. Sounds came muffled, like underwater echoes. I saw the paramedics performing chest compressions, their faces tense and desperate, but it felt distant, almost irrelevant. Suddenly, in the corner of my vision, a faint light appeared, not harsh or blinding, just warm and inviting. As I focused on it, the warmth intensified, filling every part of my being with a sense of safety and belonging I'd never known. I felt pulled gently toward it, drawn in by something I couldn't quite describe, a force so comforting that I willingly began drifting away from the chaotic scene below, completely at peace with leaving it all behind. As I moved toward that gentle glow, I started hearing something I can only describe as music, but it wasn't like any music I'd ever heard before. It wasn't coming from instruments or voices exactly. It felt like it resonated right through me, vibrating in every part of my being. The closer I got to the light, the more intense the feeling became. It was like being embraced by love itself. It filled every empty place inside me, wiping away years of exhaustion, stress, and sadness that I didn't even realize had been weighing me down. For the first time in my life, or rather, my existence, I felt completely whole. I remember thinking clearly, this is it. I'm finally home. It was a deep, undeniable knowing. There was no fear, no regret, only profound peace. Then suddenly, from within that warm glow, a presence emerged. I say presence because, initially, There was no defined form, just this overwhelming feeling of being seen, known, and completely understood. I felt more vulnerable and exposed than I'd ever been, yet completely safe. Slowly, the presence took shape, becoming clearer, and without even needing to be told, I knew who it was. It was Jesus. I'm not overly religious and definitely wasn't expecting that moment, but there was no doubt. It was him. It wasn't like the images you see in paintings or movies. He wasn't radiating gold or anything like that. Instead, he felt incredibly familiar, like I'd known him forever. His eyes met mine, and in that instant, I was completely seen. Everything I'd ever done, every thought, every question I'd ever had was right there in front of him, and he accepted all of it without judgment, without condemnation, just pure understanding. As I was gently lifted upward, everything around me seemed to shift and blur. It wasn't a scary feeling, but it was incredibly intense, as if reality itself was changing around me. I started seeing a soft, glowing light ahead, warm, inviting, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This wasn't the cliché, bright light at the end of the tunnel from movies, though. It felt more like something living, something real. It radiated this intense, powerful warmth, yet somehow it was gentle and comforting. As I moved closer, I noticed these vague shapes around me, bright and shimmering, like human figures made of pure energy. I didn't see faces exactly, but I knew they were aware of me. They felt familiar, almost like old friends I'd known forever. They never spoke with words, but somehow I clearly understood their thoughts. They were welcoming me, reassuring me that everything was okay. And for the first time, maybe ever, I felt completely safe and accepted, like I'd finally come home after wandering around lost my entire life. Then suddenly, I was somewhere entirely different, immersed in a vivid replay of my life. But it wasn't like watching memories. It was way deeper, more intense than that. I didn't just see what happened. I felt everything deeply, every emotion, every ripple effect of my actions. I experienced moments I barely remembered, like the time I comforted my coworker, Laura, when her mom passed away. I could feel exactly how deeply my words had touched her, how they'd changed her mood and brought her comfort. I also felt sharp pain seeing times I'd ignored people who needed help, like a homeless guy I regularly passed without even looking at him, as if he wasn't human. It wasn't judgmental or punishing. It was more about understanding how each action I took truly mattered, how connected we all are. I was amazed by how clearly I saw the impact of everything, big and small, on people's lives. It was overwhelming but deeply humbling. And I remember feeling this immense gratitude mixed with regret. It struck me so deeply. Nothing I did or said was insignificant. Everything counted, every interaction, every moment. Jesus didn't speak right away, but in that silence, I felt his presence fill the space in a way I can't fully describe. It was like a voice inside me, louder than words, telling me everything I had ever wondered about life, faith, and the meaning of it all. I felt loved in a way that was beyond anything I had ever experienced in my earthly life. I had spent years being the one to save others, yet in that moment, it was clear to me that I had always been the one in need of saving. I had never truly understood what it meant to follow Jesus, to live for him. I'd questioned why some people seemed to have all the time in the world to live their lives, and others were taken too soon. I spent so many years trying to save lives without ever asking if those people were ready for eternity. Now, facing him, I realized the urgency of what I had missed. He was there, not to condemn me, but to show me the truth in a way I could never ignore. It was like I was seeing the world and everything I had done, not with my eyes, but through his. Then, as if knowing my thoughts, Jesus extended his hand toward me, inviting me to follow him. It wasn't just a simple gesture, it was a call that echoed deeper than anything I'd ever felt. And in that moment, As his hand reached out, I could feel something shift in me. It wasn't fear or hesitation. It was the understanding that this was the only moment that mattered. All the other doubts, the questions about life and death, they all dissolved in the light of his presence. Everything I had feared or misunderstood about death and eternity was suddenly clear. Death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something greater than I could have ever imagined, something that words could never fully explain. I felt myself moving toward him, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. For the first time in my life, I wanted to surrender everything. The vision shifted again, and this time, I saw the world as I had never seen it before. I saw people, busy, distracted, unaware of the eternity they were rushing toward. People on their phones, scrolling endlessly through social media, consumed with their own lives, chasing after things that would never last. I saw families sitting together, but no one was truly present. They were all lost in their own worlds. It felt like time had slowed down, and I could see so clearly how so many were running after success, money, status, things that would fade away in an instant. And worst of all, I saw how many people had no idea that their time was running out. They thought they had plenty of time, but they didn't. The urgency of it all hit me hard. People were so consumed with the present that they were blind to the fact that eternity was knocking on their door. I saw churches too, some filled with people, singing hymns, following rituals, but there was something wrong. The hearts of many were distant. They were going through the motions, but they weren't truly seeking God. They believed that showing up on Sunday, saying a quick prayer before bed, was enough, but it wasn't. I saw pastors, once bold in their messages, now softening their words to make people feel comfortable. They were afraid of challenging their congregations, afraid of pushing them to truly follow God. And in that moment, I understood that the message of Jesus wasn't about making people feel good. It was about calling them to repentance, to awaken to the truth before it was too late. Jesus didn't need to say anything. I could hear it in the depths of my soul. He looked at me with sorrow, his eyes filled with love and urgency. "They believe they have time," he said, "but they do not seek me." I wept. I wept because I knew he was right. I had spent so much time thinking I was doing enough by saving people's lives, by being a good person. But now I saw that it was never enough. Good deeds alone would never save anyone. It was Jesus who saved. And so many, including myself, had lived as though they had endless time to make that decision. I had lived as if someday would come when I would surrender fully, when I would take my faith seriously. But someday never comes. I had assumed that one day I would be more devoted, more prepared. But the truth was, I had taken my time for granted. And the worst part? So many others were doing the same. So many people were living in complacency, thinking they had time to change, to find God later. But later was not guaranteed. Then Jesus led me to a different vision, and it was one that still haunts me. I found myself standing in front of a vast, uncrossable chasm. On one side was heaven, a place of warmth and light, of peace beyond understanding. On the other side were countless people, good people, people who had lived lives of kindness and generosity. They had helped others, cared for their families, and lived what society would call good lives. But as they stood there, desperate, confused, they realized something. None of it was enough. They had believed that their good deeds would save them, that being better than the next person was enough. But it wasn't. They had never accepted Jesus. They had lived their lives in the false belief that being good, without ever truly seeking God, would be enough. I watched as they cried out in desperation, "I was a good person. I helped others. I never hurt anyone." But a voice from the other side responded with sorrow, not anger. "You did many good things, but you never knew me." It hit me like a ton of bricks. These weren't evil people. They weren't criminals or murderers. They were just ordinary people who had missed the point. They had lived thinking their goodness would save them, but they never surrendered to Jesus. And now, there was no going back. As I stood there, I could feel the weight of their regret, their desperation, and their confusion. It was a kind of sorrow I can't fully put into words. They thought they had more time, but they didn't. And now, time was up. Their opportunity to truly know Jesus had passed, and they were left standing on the edge, separated from heaven by an insurmountable divide. The realization of it all crushed me. I had seen so many people live like that, so many who assumed that their good intentions would be enough, that their kindness would secure their place in eternity. I had been one of them. I had spent my whole life saving people from physical death, but I had never once stopped to consider whether they were ready for the eternity that awaited them. I had never asked if they knew Jesus, if they had truly accepted him into their hearts. In that moment, I realized how blind I had been, how selfish I had been in thinking that simply doing good was enough. It wasn't. Only Jesus saves. And how many people had I let slip through my fingers thinking I was doing enough when I wasn't? How many had I saved from death, only to send them back into lives without hope, without purpose, without Jesus? The weight of it all hit me like nothing I had ever felt before. It was a weight of regret and sorrow so deep, so intense, that it felt as if my soul was being crushed under it. Jesus didn't say anything to me as I stood there, staring at those souls who would never see heaven. His silence was heavy, filled with a sorrow that went far beyond anything I could understand. But in that silence, I knew he was showing me something that I could never unsee. He was showing me the urgency of what I had failed to do, failed to tell people that their time wasn't guaranteed, that life was fragile, and eternity was right around the corner for so many, whether they realized it or not. I had spent my life saving people from physical death, but I had neglected the more important task, helping them prepare for what came after. I had assumed that people had all the time in the world to make their peace with God, but I was wrong. Time wasn't a luxury anyone had. And for the first time in my life, I saw the full weight of what that meant. I saw the faces of people who thought they had all the time in the world, only to find that time had run out. The regret in their eyes, the sorrow, was overwhelming, and it broke me. Jesus had been trying to show me this all along, but I hadn't been listening. Now, I couldn't look away. Then, as I looked at the people in that place of waiting, the vision shifted again. Jesus took me back to my own life, back to the moments when I was still living in my body, still saving lives. But now, I saw it all through his eyes, and I realized how much I had missed. How many times had I failed to reach out to someone, not just to save their body, but to save their soul? How many times had I been so focused on the urgency of the moment, on getting someone to the hospital, that I never stopped to ask them about their faith, about their relationship with Jesus? I had been so consumed with the physical, with keeping hearts beating, that I forgot to ask the most important question of all. Are you ready for eternity? I saw all the faces of the people I had helped, the families I had comforted, and for the first time, I realized that I might have saved their bodies, but I had never considered if I was saving their souls. And it haunted me. It was as if I had missed the point entirely, as if all my years of saving people had been in vain, because I had never shared with them the truth that would save them for all eternity. The weight of that realization was too much to bear. I fell to my knees in the vision, overwhelmed by the sorrow I felt, not just for my own failures, but for everyone I had ever helped without ever considering their eternal fate. I saw so clearly how many had been spared from death in the ambulance, only to walk away without the knowledge that would truly save them. I had been so focused on the moment, on bringing someone back to life, that I missed the bigger picture. I was a healer, but I was blind. I had given people a second chance at life, but I had never once asked them about their spiritual life. I had never once told them about Jesus, never once told them that their time could run out at any moment. How many people had I sent back into a life of distractions, chasing after things that wouldn't matter when their time came? How many people had I failed to warn? The tears flowed freely as I realized the weight of the responsibility I had carried and how deeply I had failed to understand it. I had always believed in God, but I had never fully embraced what it meant to live for Him. And now, standing before Jesus, I understood. It wasn't enough to believe. It wasn't enough to just be good. I had to follow Him, fully and completely. And I had to share that message with the world. As I knelt there in the vision, the warmth of Jesus' presence surrounded me, comforting me in a way that I can't describe. His love was so deep, so pure, that it was almost unbearable. It wasn't a love like I had ever known before. It was a love that transcended everything I had ever experienced. And yet, in the midst of that love, there was an urgency that was more pressing than anything I had ever felt in my life. Jesus looked at me, and without speaking, I knew what He was telling me. I had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at a purpose. I had been brought back for a reason, and that reason was clear. I had to warn people. I had to tell them that time was running out. I had to share the message that so many people were living as if they had all the time in the world, when in reality, none of us know how much time we have left. Jesus didn't say, "Go back and save as many people as you can." He said, "Go back and tell them what you've seen. Tell them the truth." That was my mission now, to share the truth that I had learned, to warn people that their time was precious, that they needed to turn to God before it was too late. And I knew, deep in my soul, that I couldn't ignore this. I couldn't stay silent. Suddenly, everything around me began to fade. The light, the warmth, the presence of Jesus. It all dissolved into a vast emptiness, and for a moment, I felt a profound sense of loss. But I knew I had to go back. I had to return to the world I had left behind, even though I didn't want to. The peace I had felt in heaven, the love, the clarity, it was everything I had ever longed for. But now, my mission was clear. I had to share what I had seen. I had to make people understand that time was not something we could take for granted. As the darkness pulled me away from that place of light, I felt myself being dragged back into my body, back to the harsh, cold reality of the hospital room. The moment I returned, I gasped for air, and every nerve in my body screamed with pain. I could feel my lungs burning, struggling to fill with air as the machines beeped around me. The reality of it all hit me like a wave. None of it made sense, yet I knew it was real. I had been dead for over 7 minutes. I had stood in the presence of Jesus. I had seen eternity. And now I was back, a changed man with a purpose I couldn't ignore. The doctors and nurses were in complete shock as I opened my eyes, seeing the disbelief on their faces. They had written me off. I had no pulse for so long. They said it was impossible, but I knew the truth. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was sent back for a reason, and that reason was to tell everyone I could about the reality I had seen, about the urgency of salvation, and about the love and truth that Jesus had shown me. As I struggled to speak, my voice barely a whisper, I managed to say, "I saw Him. I saw Jesus." The nurses and doctors exchanged confused looks, unsure of how to process what had just happened. My family gathered around my bed, their eyes filled with a mixture of relief and confusion. They couldn't understand what had happened to me. How had I survived? How had I come back? But I knew. I knew that I had been sent back to fulfill a mission, one that I could never ignore. I began to tell them what I had seen, the light, the overwhelming love, the vision of the world lost in distractions, the souls who had waited too long to turn to Jesus. Some listened, wide-eyed, some dismissed it, unsure of what to believe. But I didn't care. The truth was in my soul, and nothing could take it away. I had to share it. I had to warn them. I couldn't let them wait too long, like I had. Time was running out, and they needed to know the truth. As I lay there in the hospital bed, barely able to move, I couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. My mind raced with everything I had seen and felt in that brief moment, what felt like eternity in heaven, and the clarity of the message Jesus had given me. I kept thinking, why me? Why was I given this second chance? The hospital room felt so cold and lifeless compared to the warmth I had just experienced, but I knew deep down that I couldn't ignore what I had been shown. I had been brought back to life for one reason: to share the truth. I had been sent back to warn others, to make them understand that there is no guarantee of time. Time, as we know it, is fleeting. I had spent my life rushing to save people, doing everything I could to bring them back from the brink of death. But I had never stopped to think about what came after. Now, I had seen it all. I had seen the way people lived, distracted by the things of this world, too comfortable in their lives to think about what would happen when their time came. But I had also seen the sadness in the eyes of the lost, the souls who had never taken the time to truly seek God, and it was that sorrow that drove me now. When I was finally able to speak, I told my family what had happened. I told them about the overwhelming peace, the love I had felt in the presence of Jesus, and the message He had given me. I tried to make them understand how urgent this was, how time was running out, and how many people were living as though they had all the time in the world when in reality, they didn't. I could see the disbelief in their eyes, the skepticism on their faces. I knew they were struggling to process what I was saying. How could they understand? How could anyone understand what I had just experienced unless they had been there? But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't just go back to my old life. I couldn't go back to just being a paramedic, saving lives without ever considering whether those lives were ready for what awaited them. I had to do more. I had to tell everyone I could about what I had seen, about what I had learned. Heaven was real. Hell was real. Time was running out, and I couldn't stand by and watch people ignore the truth. Some would listen, some would mock me, and some would turn away. But I knew my mission now. I had to warn them, no matter the cost. I couldn't keep this to myself. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how many times I had seen people in their final moments. People who had never considered their eternity. I had held their hands as they took their last breaths, offering what comfort I could. But how many of them had ever been truly ready for what came next? How many had gone into that unknown without ever knowing the truth? How many had passed away, thinking they had more time to figure it out, but never got the chance? I had been one of them. I had lived my life believing that someday I would get around to living for God, that someday I would stop being so distracted by the world around me and truly seek Him. But someday never came. I had put it off, just like so many others. I had focused on saving bodies, but I had neglected to think about saving souls. And now I knew, with every fiber of my being, that time was running out. There was no more time to waste. I had been given a second chance, but not for myself. I had been given this life back for a purpose, to share the truth with those who had yet to hear it, to warn them that they didn't have all the time in the world to figure it out. Time was precious, and it wasn't guaranteed. No one knew when their time would come, and I couldn't let them live another day thinking they had more time to make that decision. I began speaking to anyone who would listen. I didn't care if they believed me or not. I didn't care if they thought I was crazy, or if they dismissed it as some kind of hallucination brought on by the trauma. What I had seen was real, and nothing could change that. I spoke to my friends, my colleagues, anyone who would stand still long enough to hear me. I told them about the light, the peace, the overwhelming love I felt, and the urgent message I received. I told them about the souls I saw, lost and waiting, crying out for a second chance they would never get. I shared with them the vision of the world, consumed by distractions, lost in the pursuit of things that didn't matter. I told them about the people sitting in churches, some with hearts far from God, going through the motions, but never truly seeking Him. And I told them, with every ounce of passion I could muster, that there was no time to wait. You couldn't put off your salvation thinking that someday you would get around to it. Someday wasn't guaranteed. It wasn't a matter of being good enough or waiting for the perfect moment. It was a matter of accepting Jesus now, before it was too late. Some people listened, wide-eyed, as if they had heard the truth for the first time. Some of them asked questions, wanting to know more, wanting to understand. Some even cried, realizing that they had been living the same way, distracted by the world and putting off their relationship with God. But there were others who dismissed me. Some laughed, as if it was just a story I had made up, as if my experience had no value. It didn't matter. It didn't matter how many people believed me or not. What mattered was that I had to speak. I had to warn them, and I couldn't be silent. I couldn't go back to being the man I was before, the man who thought saving people's bodies was enough. Now I knew the truth. Saving souls was the most important thing. I had been sent back with a purpose, and that purpose was clear. I had to make sure people understood the urgency of the situation. I had to make sure no one else would leave this life without knowing the truth about eternity. And so, I continued. I spoke to strangers on the street, at the hospital, in churches, anywhere I could. I told my story again and again, warning people that time wasn't on their side, that they needed to make their decision now, while they still had the chance. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't go back to living as if everything was normal. Heaven was real. Hell was real. Time was running out, and I was living proof that it could all change in an instant. The peace I had felt in that moment, in the presence of Jesus, had changed me forever. I knew that there was more to life than what we see and experience on this earth. I knew that eternity was real, and that's what mattered. So I kept sharing the message, one person at a time, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone would listen before it was too late. There are days when I feel overwhelmed by everything I saw, everything I experienced. Sometimes I wonder if what I saw was meant for everyone, or if it was just for me. I think back to that moment in heaven, the overwhelming peace, the love, the clarity, and it hits me hard. I was shown the truth, and now I carry that truth with me every day. The world feels so different now. People around me are still so focused on their routines, their jobs, their endless distractions. But I see things differently. I see the way people chase after things that will fade, things that have no eternal value. I see the way people live like they have all the time in the world, never thinking about what happens when their time runs out. And it breaks my heart because I know now how fragile it all is. I know what's at stake. Every day, I think about the souls I saw, the ones who had waited too long to turn to Jesus, and I wonder how many of them were just like the people I see today, living their lives, thinking they had all the time in the world, never realizing that their time could end at any moment. It's not just about the people I speak to, it's about everyone. It's about the countless souls who are walking around in their own little bubbles, distracted by everything around them, unaware of the eternity that lies just beyond this life. And I know, in my heart, that if I don't speak up, if I don't share what I've seen, then I'm just as guilty as the rest. I can't let it be said that I had this knowledge, this urgent message, and kept it to myself. Every day, I live with the weight of that responsibility, the weight of knowing what I've been shown. And the truth is, it's heavy, but it's a weight I carry willingly, because I know the alternative is worse. I know that if I don't speak, if I don't warn people, then I'm part of the problem. So I speak. I speak to anyone who will listen, because I know that time is running out. I know that we don't have forever to make these decisions. Jesus gave me a second chance for a reason, and I'm not going to waste it. I'm not going to wait for someone else to do what I've been called to do. Time is precious, and I won't let anyone waste it without knowing the truth. There are times when I'm asked if I regret coming back, if I ever wish I could just stay in the peace of heaven, where everything felt so right, so whole. And to be honest, there are moments when I long for that feeling again. The peace, the warmth, the absolute certainty of being loved without question. But then I remember why I was sent back, and it hits me all over again. There's a reason I'm here. I can't turn my back on that. It's not about what I want anymore. It's about what I was shown, about the people who still don't know the truth, and about the urgency I was given. I've seen how fragile life is. I've seen how quickly it can all end, and how easily people can miss the most important decision they'll ever make. I can't just go back to living my life as I did before, taking everything for granted, pretending that there's plenty of time for everyone to figure it out. There isn't. And every time I speak about what I've seen, I'm reminded of that fact. Some people look at me like I'm crazy. Some walk away thinking I'm just another person with a story. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm doing what I was called to do. I'm not just saving lives anymore. I'm saving souls. And that's something that lasts forever. I've come to realize that my job as a paramedic, all those years of saving people physically, wasn't the ultimate calling. It was just preparation. It was the foundation for what I was truly meant to do. I'm still saving lives, but now it's in a way I never expected. Now, I'm saving souls. I'm planting seeds, speaking the truth that no one else will say, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone will hear it and turn back before it's too late. I can't help everyone. I know that. Some people won't listen. Some will mock me. Some will ignore me. But I know that there are others. People who are ready. People who are searching for something deeper, something more. And I know that if I can reach just one of them, if I can make just one person realize the truth before it's too late, then it's all worth it. I live with that urgency now, every day. Every conversation, every moment spent with others is a chance to speak the truth. I don't know how much time I have left, and I don't know how much time anyone else has. But I do know this. I won't waste another second pretending that there's time to spare. Time is too precious, and the message I carry is too important. It's funny how life can change so quickly. I used to think I had time. I used to think that I could keep living my life, doing my job, helping people, and that everything would just work out. But now, I see how wrong I was. The world is full of distractions, full of things that try to pull us away from the truth. People spend their lives chasing after things, money, success, status, and in the process, they forget the most important thing, their eternal soul. I can't tell you how many people I've seen in the hospital, in the emergency room, on the streets, living as though they have all the time in the world. But I know the truth now. I've seen it firsthand. Time is a gift, but it's not guaranteed. You can't assume you'll always have another chance to make things right, to seek God, to turn your life around. It's not about being perfect. It's about being willing to turn to Him, to surrender, to ask for forgiveness. And I've learned that the hard way. I've learned it through the experiences of others, through the people I've helped, and most of all, through the grace that was shown to me. The grace that brought me back to life, not for me, but for those who still don't know the truth. I'll never forget that moment when I stood in front of Jesus. I'll never forget the look in His eyes, the love that radiated from Him, and the sorrow that I felt, knowing how many people were living their lives unaware of the urgency of what was to come. I've come to realize that my experience wasn't just for me, it was for all of us. It was a wake-up call for the world, a call to stop living in complacency, to stop assuming we have all the time in the world to figure things out. The time is now. The decision is now. And it doesn't matter how much you've done or how much you've failed. What matters is whether you are willing to turn to Him, to accept His grace, and to make the choice to follow Him fully. I don't know how much time I have left in this life, but I do know that I won't waste it. I won't wait for the right moment. I've seen what happens when you wait too long, and I can't keep that knowledge to myself. I can't keep that warning to myself. Time is running out for so many, and if I have the chance to share this truth, to help someone see the reality of eternity, then I will do it. I will never stop, because I know now, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that what I've been shown, what I've experienced, is the most important thing anyone could ever know. Time is precious. Life is fragile. And the only thing that truly matters is whether or not we are ready for what comes next.